I'll just save it at 1 HP just to taunt him, just to make sure he can see both butterflies just have 1 HP. I'm gonna play the third butterfly for a similar reason. Hello! Oh, yeah, this one feels good. I think this is the one, guys. We are in. Goodbye! This deck is so toxic. Honestly, I agree with you guys. Alright guys, I'm back. I feel alive again. This new expansion has revitalized my love for Runeterra. Honestly, haven't loved the last 2 expansions. I've talked a little bit about, you know, some of the issues and some, like, the other 2 Targon things. And I think that was kind of like a common consensus. So, you know, I've been kind of like, a lot of you guys have noticed my content has, like, I haven't done a lot of deck guides. I haven't done the Meta Mondays. But man, I am back. I just got done with the most fun stream I've had in a really long time. We did some fun bet stuff with chat. And we, most importantly, made kind of like the new elusive cancer deck. I played this deck to a 72% win rate today on ladder, and that was over, you know, like 7 hours or something like that. And this honestly gives real flashbacks to my old Zed's standalone Relentless Pursuit semi-elusives deck. For those of you guys who have the privilege of remembering that glorious meta. Basically, the idea behind the deck is we are going to stick a big buffed Sparklefly or a big buff Fiora on the board and protect it with Bastion, with more buffs, with barriers, with hushing opponents' threats, etc., etc. You know the drill. It's a big elusive buff deck. And Sparklefly, similarly to Fiora, will basically win you the game if you can protect it over a few turns. Sometimes very, very quickly. Because when, you know, it obviously doesn't say win the game like Fiora does, but a big elusive lifesteal that's so efficient, if the opponent doesn't have Hush, you will be able to outrace them. Even if they're putting a lot of pressure on you, you can ignore their attacks. And the Sparklefly will single-handedly win the game on its own. This deck is, I would say, a little bit tricky to play. You'll have to think a lot about what the opponent's threats are, and you'll have to play very reactive around those threats. I think the biggest mistake people will make net decking this deck is probably going a little too ham or like playing too proactively, trying to get it in. Really, even though your win condition is proactive, you need to use your spells reactively. Mulliganing this deck is going to be a little bit tricky. This is one of the harder decks to mulligan, but if you don't have Fiora or Sparklefly, it's easy. Kick everything. If you do have Fiora or Sparklefly, you need to think a few turns ahead, think about the matchup, and think about, you know, what you're gonna need and want for the first 4 turns of the game. And that's going to lead to a lot of like variable decisions on what to mulligan and what to keep. Although I'll almost always keep one source of permanent buff if I can from Mentor, Standalone, or Blessing of Targon, the real crux of the deck. Actually, speaking of mulligans, one of the questions I got a lot today on stream was, you know, what happens if we don't draw, you know, the Sparklefly or the Fiora? And if you pull up the hypergeometric calculator, you'd be surprised how reliable these odds are. So we set it to 4 turns into the game because, you know, turn 4 is usually the speed which you're going to need, which is 12 cards drawn on a full mulligan. And we're looking for the 6 outer, oops, not 66, 6 outer, that's 3 Sparkle, 3 Fiora. And that'll generate 90% odds. And keep in mind, it's actually even higher than that because that's not even including stuff like the Guiding Touch draws, which we will be using if we don't have that in hand. And a lot of matchups where it's actually okay to play it on something like, you know, turn 5 or 6, just because we have other plays in the early game. Partially, that's what Zoe's for example. So it is a fun deck. It will challenge you, and I think the deck will teach you a lot about how to think about hand reading and how to think about playing against opponent tools. I'm going to be showing you guys games of this deck, and I think it's going to be an extremely important lesson for you guys, even if you're not interested in playing this deck in particular. I think you guys would benefit from watching that because I'll be talking about a lot of kind of, you know, how to play around things and how to put the opponent on specific cards in hand. Anyway, real quick, if you want to import this, I've put the deck code in the pinned comments, but you're really going to want to check out the Mobalytics link, which is going to have an updated version. By the time you see this video, if you click on the Mobalytics link, you're probably going to notice probably a couple cards have changed, minor ratios or some such, and you're probably just going to get a slightly more refined version, although what you're looking at is very refined already. Right before we get into the actual games that I'll be, breaking down from my earlier stream, let me talk a little bit about the individual components of the list and why they're here. So standalone is kind of a large core of the list, and it's really important that Sparklefly is a 2 mana buff target. Not only does this allow us to play it with standalone on turn 3 with the total 6 mana we have saved up, but it also means Sparklefly can be played on turn 2 into Mentor of the Stones on turn 3 into an attack that immediately buffs a valuable 2 mana buff target. It's hard to explain how important it is for this deck that this power buff target is 2 mana. If it was any 3 mana card, it probably wouldn't work nearly as well. A large part of our win condition is this card, Relentless Pursuit. Sometimes if we're playing for the big elusive win condition, we'll be winning off of the Relentless Pursuit dealing face damage, and these Sparkleflies, as you saw from the kind of clip at the beginning, get pretty big. That's a lot of face damage. But of course, Fiora can use Relentless Pursuit as well. It can often be what ends up leveling her up for the win. So just to explain a little bit of the ratioing of some of these cards, probably a lot of people are wondering, why are we running one Zoe? Well, Zoe is here to smoothen the odds a little bit and to make sure that we have a unit to be drawing into. I don't want to be running too many copies of Zoe since she's not great to double draw, and it was a little tight on space to fit in 2. I might be tweaking the ratios out a little bit, but 1 is actually perfect for what this deck is trying to do at the moment. We're also running 1 Pale Cascade, which seems really crazy, right? Pale Cascade is seen as a power card in Targon, and it's buff card, and it cycles. Wait, 1 Pale Cascade in this deck? What's up with that? Well, the weird thing about this deck is that you're playing for one of 2 conditions, either Fiora getting enough health to survive to kill 4 enemies, or Sparklefly putting enough pressure to win the game. But the thing is, Sparklefly needs permanent buffs. Temporary buffs, per turn buffs, don't actually work very well for this game plan. And Pale Cascade isn't really great on Fiora because we have a ton of cheap combat tricks for her anyway, and +1 health is often not really what she needs. Don't get me wrong, I might bump this up back to 2, but it is definitely not as amazing of a card in this deck as it is in other Targon decks. Next, we're also running 1 of Astral Protection. You've seen this card in Tom Soraka. Basically, this just gives us the ability to dodge out, certain high damage effects. And we're running Bastion. This is our main counterplay to big kill spells such as, scary things like Vengeance. And you'll have to use this proactively to beat out stuff like Hush as well. The rest of the deck is actually pretty self-explanatory. So I kind of figure it might be better for me to spend the next couple of minutes before we jump into the games talking about the cards that aren't in this deck that you might have expected to see and why. I know you guys are all budding young deck builder theory crafters like myself and are probably pretty curious about this. So to kind of break it down, Sunblessed Vigor, it looks like something that might be in this list, and it's not bad. I could see it as a one of, but ultimately it just doesn't quite do enough and mostly just gets kind of outshone by both Sharpsight and Chainvest in particular. Sunblessed Vigor is actually a great card in almost any other Targon deck that's going for a similar game plan, but with these Demacia tools, we just don't need it. Another card that we see a lot in sometimes similarish builds is Solar Priestess. The reason you see Solar Priestess is because it has the ability to pull specifically Written in the Stars. So a lot of people that build all-in Fiora with Targon try to use this as a backup Fiora. I could maybe switch to 1 Solari, but I really don't like that card in this archetype because it's really slow, and even when you get the Fiora, it's a high roll to get Written in the Stars, and it's often too slow. You need to be getting Fiora online early for it to do enough. Another one is Strafing Strike as well, which, in normal all-in Fiora decks, we run this card just because we want to run more single combats, but this is not only a Fiora deck, it's also an Elusives deck, so we can't go too deep into spells that only really work for the Fiora game plan, such as well, Concerted Strike. And lastly, we've got 2 more. Zenith Blade, which is, a good buff thing. It doesn't work as well with this deck. Our mana is very, very tight, we need to not use our mana too proactively, and these small stats actually don't end up mattering. The overwhelm is fairly niche. And then finally, Judgment. Now, a lot of people like running Judgment in Fiora, and it doesn't really make sense. It's actually never made sense. Judgment actually has really bad anti-synergy with Fiora's game plan. Fiora is a deck that wants to be played in a way to effectively play her early, own the board with buffs and tricks, and threaten pressure onto the opponent from winning the game from an early leveled position, right? And you need to be able to maintain reactivity to get that. You can't spend all your mana on a spell, ever, right? That's not how Fiora decks work. Judgment is a great card in a deck like Dragons. Dragons is a good archetype to run like 1 or 2 Judgments, and it's totally fine there. I think a lot of people see synergy with Fiora just because she wins when you kill enough, and Judgment makes her win you the game. But when you think about it, that doesn't really make sense. If I'm not running a Fiora deck and I get a good Judgment off, I've already won the game because your board is empty and mine isn't, and I win. That's how Judgment works. And likewise, if my Fiora is on the board and alive and protected on turn 6 or 7 when I would be casting Judgment, if that was in the deck, then I'd win the game regardless of the Judgment anyway. So they really don't make any sense together. I think it's incredibly important to look at synergy like that. I see so many people that look at synergy as like a superficial sort of, you know, oh, this kind of works with this mechanically. And synergy is a lot more about timing and game plan. There's a lot of kind of like these sort of synergies that people see that aren't really there. Anyway, that is it for the deck breakdown. So now we're going to jump into some matches, and I can't wait. Normally for this kind of deck guide format, I only do 2, but this deck is very nuanced, and we have to play a very different game plan depending on what the opponent's playing every time. It's a very reactive and cautious style. So I've prepared 3 games to break down for you guys. Strap in, boys. All right, guys, so we get into our game here. Vivo, I actually played against Vivo a lot. He actually basically always plays this deck, by the way. He's been playing it for eons and eons. He's always playing Freljord Shadow Isles. He's, you know, I mean, we're not in Masters right now because the season just reset, but I often queue into him in Masters. So this is a bit of a tricky one. We can solo keep Fiora. Single combat's not going to be as effective here just because we're really looking for a buff, right? We're not trying to accelerate the Fiora too quickly in this case. In a different matchup with a lot of cheap units like aggro, spiders, that kind of thing, I would absolutely, very happily keep single combat. I'm also not going to keep Astral Protection because even though Shadow Isles Freljord is a control deck, they don't usually kill your units with damage, they kill them with destroy spells, right? Something like, you know, Ezreal Draven is the kind of deck where I would definitely be keeping Astral Protection in my opening hand for. So, let's see exactly what he decides to do. And he goes in to play an Avarosan and Sentry. Now, I have the opportunity to play Fiora here. There's a pretty good chance that he would be inclined to take an Avalanche if I did, which in this case, I'm actually okay with. He doesn't have the follow-up. Yeah, let's go ahead and play the Fiora here. Now, I might not be able to block. That's actually a little bit surprising that he attacked. That makes sense. Attack pre-Avalanche. I don't have the ability to block, unfortunately. It's not worth losing the Fiora to like a Vile Feast or something. So he'll attack there, deal 2 damage. Our health doesn't matter. Keep that in mind. I expect to see an Avalanche here. Ooh, interesting. Okay. So he knows my Fiora can't really block to be safe. And I want to keep Guiding Touch so that we're not, you know, losing permanent health to the Avalanche. So in this case, we're just going to go ahead and open attack, threatening the Avarosan and Sentry for, you know, an extra potential kill and see what happens. There's a lot of matchups where I might not want to let the Sentry trigger, but here we're kind of starved for kills. We need to take every kill we can get. Excuse me. Okay, so in this case, I think, just take the Guiding Touch. We're not going to do anything else fancy. We do need to use Standalone before anything else happens, but I want to Guiding Touch before a lot of other options, just because Guiding Touch is kind of like the one that unlocks the most plays, if that makes sense, right? Because Guiding Touch will allow me to try to do something else if I draw something. In this case, I do want to play for mana efficiency, and I know I'm going to need to Standalone, so it's very typical for that deck to pass back if I pass here. And right now, we're actually not in a situation where I want to burn mana equivalently. Right now, if I pass and he passes back, that would feel bad. I'm just going to go ahead and play my standalone now, just because there's not really a big threat to this. I know, you know, that deck has nothing that can really deal 5 damage. You know what? Let's go ahead and pull it up. It's really important when we're playing against decks, and his version is going to be a bit different from this for sure. He's running no Trindamirs, but we need to be looking at the opponent's list while we're playing against it, and just trying to make sure we're playing against different things he could run. He's running Black Spear in that deck. That's very interesting. Maybe he could even have, you know, a Vile Feast that re-threatens the Fiora, but that'd be rare. So we have the protection here. Yeah, that Black Spear almost got me, by the way. There was actually a weird combo hand that could have killed that Fiora there without my ability to respond. It would have been like Black Spear into second Vile Feast or something. But very, very, very niche. All right. So, you know, the opponent's at 7 mana here. And something that's really important is we kind of have to bluff Bastion. Bastion is what's stopping him from just playing Vengeance on us right now. So I don't really have the ability to tap under 4. I'm going to go ahead and Guiding Touch the Fiora right now, and then just pass. And if he spends any mana, then I can spend mana. I don't have to bluff Bastion anymore. But, you know, until he spends under 7, I can't spend under 4, because then he can Bastion me, and that wouldn't be good. So now, you know, he's got the Trundle. He's almost certainly not going to attack into me. Vivo's not a bad player. We're not going to bait him. Like, he knows that we've got something like Repost, and he presumably doesn't have the other ping. He would have used it a couple of turns before, right? If we saw this turn, remember, with the Black Spear, we know he doesn't have another Vile Feast or an Unspeakable Horror because he would have used it there. So in this case, you know, if we passed, maybe he would attack with that hand thinking we wouldn't repost, but we're just kind of wasting mana if that were to happen. So we're just going to go ahead and stand alone before anything else happens. If he was a weaker player, then I might, you know, there's a call to try to like bait him. It's like, oh, the Trundle attacks and then I stand alone. But that doesn't really happen here. It would never really work out like that. He's not a bad player. You know, he's playing around Repost. He's playing around all that stuff. So here we can just open with a nice simple attack on the Trundle. And keep in mind, if he forces one of our options out, if he forced us to play mana there to win this combat, by doing, I don't know, like double Troll Chant, I have no idea, Flash Freeze, then he would tap under Vengeance. So again, I still want to stay above 4 mana, but if he taps under, it's only if he taps under Vengeance, then I would need to. Interesting, he's running Mist Call. He's running a very irregular deck. For the most part on ladder, you can, you know, kind of predict exactly what the opponent's going to be doing and try to make sure you've got counters for everything. But that's actually a little bit scary there, Mist Call. And, I mean, for all I know, he could even have a second Black Spear. Maybe he's running 2 of them. So that's actually something I might have to play around. Normally, against that deck, I'd, like, Mentor and Relentless Pursuit or something like that. Playing around Grasp as well. It's a little bit of a risky spot, right? How much mana can I keep? Well, he doesn't have Vengeance, so I don't have to keep Bastion mana. But I need to be able to protect my Fiora through Grasp and even through a second Black Spear because he's using a weird deck. So I certainly can't tap under 2 mana. So, you know, what can I do here? I want to go to 3 mana. I want to be a little bit efficient. In this case, why don't I just go ahead and play Mentor of the Stones? It's not doing a ton in this case, but if it dies, then I can gem and heal up my Fiora. And it's just a unit. It's just like mana that I don't have to develop until later. However, if I use Pursuit now, as I would love to, it would be very vulnerable to both Grasp as well as the Black Spear that maybe he's running as a 2 of. So let's play safe. And keep in mind, suddenly he's at the scary amount of mana because now he can Vengeance knowing that he beats Bastion. He's got 9 mana, which is what they need to Vengeance, and then play a Bastion Popper. That would be Vile Feast, Troll Chant, etc. And those are all 2 mana for that deck. So once they're at 9 mana, it gets a little bit scary. Hands that have Vengeance will just go in for it. They don't have to care about Bastion anymore, which is a problem because, I mean, we're bluffing Bastion. We're trying to make sure he can't go in for the Vengeance, right? It's always important to get inside your opponent's head and think about what they're thinking about and what they can do and what they can't do, right? Because it's just about not letting him feel safe making play. Goes in for the Ruination. Wow, a really huge commitment. It's actually going to pay off here. I mean, it slows down his strategy a ton, but I don't have the counter for it, and he knows that even if I Bastion the Fiora at this point in time, I mean, he's losing the units too, so my Fiora would have nothing to kill. So, I'm okay with that ruination. It's definitely not super ideal for me, but now we can start putting out a lot of pressure. We know we're going to play Fiora. Let's actually play Zoe first, just because there's a chance her level up matters sometimes. So, yep, let's go ahead and play the Fiora. And we're going to get some pretty sweet attacks here. You'll notice that his ruination into that turn forces him out of a ton of resources. And now what I can do is I can put just kind of like a crazy amount of pressure on him with a couple of these attacks. In this case, I think I'm just going to Relentless Pursuit now so that I can take the open attack when he's out of mana that turn as well. We can't save Relentless Pursuit for next turn. It's really, really, really greedy to do that. And now we're at a point in the game where things have kind of turned around. My Fiora lost her kill charges, and suddenly I'm dealing a lot of Nexus damage. So I'm going to use my Mentor on the Zoe at this point. We're going to transition into the Elusive game plan. And we've got another open attack here that's going to be just generating a crazy amount of value. We can even attach some gems to this open attack. We draw the Blessing of Tarragon there. And here we have to think about what we might need to answer and how much mana we have the ability to spend, really. I actually kind of want a star chart before this attack if possible, but I need to be threatening as much damage as possible. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to go ahead and gem up this Mentor twice. We do the Mentor because A, we're playing around stuff like Harsh Winds and Flash Freeze, so we want our small units to have kind of like the wider distribution of stats, so that he doesn't really have a good angle on any of those cards. And we can keep the rest of our mana up for just kind of flexibility for combat tricks. Let's use just one more here, because we've got, you know, double sharp sight to be able to beat a lot of different potential hands. I actually should have used that last gem on the Mentor probably, just because Zoe's going to be a little too hushable at that point. But yeah, I definitely messed up that last gem. We're probably losing a point of damage because of this. And he's going in for Withering Wail. Now, I mentioned that I'm buffing the Mentor to play around Harsh Winds. Now, you might say, well, Swim, what if he has, you know, what if he can punish the Mentor's 1 health stat line? Bit of a risk, right? No, because we have enough ways to protect it no matter what. And we are going to do that. And now we're even threatening, you know, the over-the-top lethal. And it looks like he's got no answer at all. So we get a nice clean win. And I think that's a pretty good demonstration of how to play the deck and how we have to think about it. It's a surprisingly flexible deck. You want to play safe. You want to make sure that you always have the mana to stop the opponent's answers. And don't go in too committally if you don't have to. I want to also touch on that Relentless Pursuit turn. It was very important that we did it that turn, because against the deck that has Frostbites, you can't let them, if they frostbite you on your attack turn, then you're locked out of Relentless Pursuiting that turn again. So you want to try to use Relentless Pursuit on defense turns a little bit more against decks that have Frostbite, because then they can't kind of double the value on their Frostbite, right? All right, going in for a second game here. Ooh, and we're against Fiora Shen. This is also a pretty hard matchup, actually. Fiora Shen and Field of Rush are probably the two hardest decks in the meta for this deck. Fiora Shen is actually a bit close. I think it's actually pretty even, but if the Fiora Shen player is very good, then it's hard. We are going to take a full mulligan here, looking for Sparklefly or Fiora, and we hit. Chain Vest, didn't need to double up on the Chain Vest, but you're really happy to have it here. Chain Vest is just a joy to have in the early game like that. And we're already kind of consolidating his hand range a little bit, right? You should always be doing this. When you're against the opponent, narrow their range. Think to yourself on every turn, okay, he didn't play Caretaker on turn 1. He doesn't have Caretaker. He wouldn't have played Protector on turn 2 without a unit, so he could still have Protector. But every turn, you're thinking to yourself, what's their hand range? What could he have? What do I have to play around, right? So I'll play the Fiora here. Because I have good ways of protecting her, there's no downside. Here's his Protector, and suddenly, you know, we're in a pretty bad situation. We can't take an attack because he could easily have Riposte. So we're going to pass and probably burn his 1 mana unless he wants to do a single combat. If he's got single combat and Sharp Sight, wow, I would love it. That would be so good. If he has single combat and Sharp Sight, he might go in for it here, thinking that he's safe because I have 3 mana, which normally means I only have 1 trick. He's thinking about it. Oh, he's doing it. This is so beautiful. This is so beautiful. Because he single combats, I Sharp Sight. He can only do this if he also has Sharp Sight. He definitely has the Sharp Sight too. Now he'll Sharp Sight, And he'll think that he's fine because Chain Vest is a very rare card that people don't play around. That's beautiful. I love. As soon as he like started thinking, you could tell as soon as he didn't pass right away, I knew exactly what he had. That's so good for me. That's so amazing for me. And I mean, he did misplay a bit, but a lot of people don't expect decks to run Chain Vest at all. And if you're a good player, if you're not expecting Chain Vest, that is exactly the play you made. What he made was a good play against any situation except for me having Chain Vest. Because while I have less mana than him, he needs to try to capitalize on that unique opportunity. While he has 2 spells and he thinks I only have 1, he needed to try to capitalize off that. Didn't work out in that case. So now he definitely can't attack into me with the Shen, right? He has no ability to attack here because, you know, he knows I could have repost or whatever. So I want to be a little bit mana efficient. Why don't I just go ahead and Guiding Touch? I know I'm going to use this. I know I'm going to use it on the Fiora. Why the heck not? So he'll skip this attack here because he has to play around second Sharp Sight. Okay, great. Now, check this out. I've got 7 mana, which means I've got Blessing into Sharp Sight or Repost here. A couple of different plays. If I pass, he could pass back on me. I've got more mana than him, so he's getting a good value out of that pass back by burning my mana. Let's go ahead and think, you know, think about the deck. Think about what it runs. Repost is big. You know, he could have Concerted, but he doesn't have a second unit, so it's not huge. Notify doesn't really hit anything against a deck except for like Single Combat and Relentless Pursuit. So mostly we're worried about Repost, right? If we go into an attack with this Blessing of Targon, we're actually outside of Repost's range, right? Because we've got the Tough on the Fiora. He could Repost, but it doesn't even threaten the Fiora, which puts me in a really good position here. We go for the Blessing of Targon before the Repost because that's the permanent buff, and the Repost is the temporary buff, so it doesn't matter. And this is another beautiful exchange. This was great. So I know that looked kind of weird because it didn't accomplish anything, but I effectively traded my Fiora's health for his Riposte, and that is great. Riposte is a great card in this mirror match. My Riposte are super valuable because it's a free kill on the Fiora. His Riposte are super valuable because it's a free protection. So even though we lost some Fiora's health from that, it doesn't really matter. The fact that we forced out his Riposte is really, really, really amazing. So he's played Fiora, and now he's going to be able to, you know, attack in with a Shen, which is a little bit nasty. This is a matchup where I don't mind prematurely using Bastion. I could pass here as well. He's likely to... he probably doesn't have the ability to pass back just because, you know, of his position here. So he'll take the attack, and then we'll just respond to that. He's got, I think, too free of an attack not to take it, just because he gets the free barrier. It's a little sad that I don't have, like, a single combat to kill the Shen, but it's not the biggest deal. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and Sharp Sight to protect my Fiora. Again, he could threaten this in a few different ways. If he's going to use a second Repost here, second Repost, think about the hand range. Second Repost is pretty likely. He already played one Repost. Some versions of this deck run 3, but keep in mind, second Fiora drawn is second Repost, right? So he could very easily have second Repost here. If he does, it'll exchange with ours. So he's thinking about something. That means pretty much he's got something. I think he probably wouldn't use a Repost there if he had it. And so I think that pause actually indicates second Repost. I'm very happy to look at that pause and be like, yeah, this guy's got second Repost. So here's what I'll do. I actually feel pretty safe prematurely using Bastion, I think. Because Bastion is a card that gets, you know, it's always going to get value in this matchup. All of his things that target my Fiora are all things that I want to stop anyway, so using it preemptively here is fine. Here's the thing, though. We have to think, does his deck have anything that punishes me for bashing here? And it does. Relentless Pursuit. If he plays that, I'm powerless, and my Fiora dies. So we have to pass here. Always play around everything with this deck. It's a full combo deck, and if you play smartly and safely, you will pretty much beat out anything. We can, in this case, get a nice, safe, open attack with Guiding Touch, forcing his action first. We expect that Riposte to come down now. There's a very good chance that's his option, and it'll just trade with our Riposte if that happens. Honestly, if he has that, that's pretty scary for me. Double Repost hand is actually not too easy for my deck to beat. Ooh, Ooh, Stand United. It's interesting. Okay. Of course, second Shed in hand does that. So, it's just giving another barrier, which the damage on my Fiora doesn't matter too much, but it's slowing me down. It's stopping an additional kill. So, I could try to do something with Relentless Pursuit if he taps out, but if he's not tapping out, I can't. He's successfully stopped my next attack, which is pretty awkward. You know, I really wanted that attack, because when we get to turn 9, if he plays Brightsteel Protector and my Fiora isn't leveled, that's a really big problem for me. In fact, it's a pretty gigantic problem for me. So this is a pretty awkward position. I do need to try to threaten a bit of a pace to this game. You know, I don't want to go in too aggressively. So let's ask what would happen if I tried to Pursuit and riposte into his Fiora right now. It's a really committal play, but at 4 mana, what is he going to do to stop me? He could force out his own barrier here. He could single combat and take my barrier off and take a win off that, which would be really, really nasty. I don't have a lot of good options. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to Pale Cascade. This leaves my mana open and flexible, so he can't punish me, but it allows it to cycle out. And that's, do you see what I'm saying about Pale Cascade not being amazing in this deck? Like, it wasn't okay there. It cycled and healed my Fiora for 1, but we rarely need the attack, and we kind of would rather just see the next card rather than play the Pale Cascade. So if I play Mentor of the Stones right now, if I go down to 3 mana, it might be really hard to save my Fiora from, you know, for example, something like a single combat, right? If I go down to 3 mana, that's going to be really tricky. In this case, I'm going to make the call that I think we're safe. This is actually a bit of a risk. I'm basically bluffing that I have Sharp Sight, and he shouldn't feel safe single combating into me because of that. I am very worried about this Brightsteel formation. I want to put as much pressure as possible. I need to be mana efficient for the next couple of turns, and I actually want my Fiora to heal because eventually these reposts will get taxed out. So I'm going to need her native health to be able to tank 1 hit too. So I want this Mentor to block so that I can get gems and start actually trying to get this Fiora charges. He's been blocking me this entire time with the barriers, right? So, to keep my Fiora alive, I'm basically forced to just repost here. Pretty nasty. This is what I was saying about good Fiora Shen players being able to potentially punish you out. It's not a terrible matchup, it's just slightly unfavored. It's probably like 45% or something like that. But it's, yeah, a bit unfavored. Okay, so here we're thinking Concerted Strike is pretty likely. And by the way, we have to figure he has like Deny or Nopify. They're not going to hit much in this deck, but we expect our Relentless Pursuits and single combats to be countered. Okay, let's see what he's thinking about here. He's thinking about a lot, probably has multiple options. The most likely thing is Concerted, but single combat comes out there, and that makes a lot of sense. So in this case, I think the only thing I can do is Bastion. If he's on the multi-trick right now, if he also has the Concerted, we're probably going to lose. I mean, he's got, you know, a ton of spells, potential ways to threaten stuff. And it looks like we're safe for the time being, although it's possible he just wanted to Concert it after this combat for some reason. I don't know why he would do that. So we have to think, okay, is there a reason to gem right now before action passes to him? Is there a reason to do that? Or should I potentially save mana? Do I get punished either way? What could he have that, you know, he wouldn't have used already that punishes my gem use here? And there's actually specifically nothing, except for, you know, Concerted Strike is going to kill me anyway. Okay, plays the Cythria. Now that's actually quite interesting, because that means it's decently likely he's thinking about playing a Relentless Pursuit. And if he does that, then my Fiora is actually going to die to his Fiora, and that's going to be really bad. If he's got Pursuit here, I've probably lost to it. Okay. So he doesn't have the Pursuit, which is nice. It's not super likely he has it, by the way. It's a one of in most Fiora Shen decks, but it's something we want to play around if we have the ability to. And the fact that we didn't have the ability to there just simply felt really bad. Okay, so we want to threaten as valuable units as possible. The most important thing we're going to do is try to kill this Shen. We have to try to kill this Shen. I think we are pretty much forced into open attacking, because if the Brightsteel formation comes out, that's going to be a little too nasty for us otherwise. We might be able to beat him through Brightsteel formation as long as we take the open attack and lock it out. So we are going to use the full gems. will, in this case, force him to commit first. We don't have to save mana for these other gems, so we'll attack the Shen here. Could be another barrier. You expect something to happen, but he's got to be running out of barriers at this point, so we get the kill. Nice. And our Fiora finally levels up. A likely reason we get this kill, by the way, the hands range. Reads don't matter right now because it's about to happen, but it increases the odds of formation coming down, right? That would be pretty scary. Cytheria comes down, which is a relief because he's down to a 6 mana here, and the Cytherias are pretty scary, but we have the ability to beat them out. So he doesn't really have anything terrifying he could play. He doesn't have Concerted, he would have used it earlier. Pursuit can be notified or denied, but I'll play Mentor. I want to Pursuit this turn, but if he has Deny, there's some weird hands that might spend their mana under 4, and now, if I Pursuit right now, I'm still getting stopped by Notify, but it's the best Pursuit chance I'm getting all game. Let's try for it. If I snuck this under a Deny when he doesn't have Deny mana, that's really good. So Deny's still in his range because he hasn't had the opportunity to use it yet. And suddenly, you know, this Fiora is getting the 4th kill, which is very, very important for, yeah, our ability to close out this game. At 3 mana, he's not really going to have anything significant here. His Fiora isn't really doing anything off of that. I do kind of value the extra buff, so I will go ahead and challenge his Fiora here. This is actually a little interesting. I don't want to let the River Shaper strike. I don't want to let the River Shaper draw. So I can challenge the Fiora here, and I have to think, like, what would punish this? Well, if he drew a Sharp Sight recently that he couldn't have used, that would punish this. Was there an opportunity for him to use Sharp Sight in the last 2 turns? And unless I'm mistaken, I'm pretty sure there wasn't. So we can... Did I mess up? Oh, man, I guess I messed up. I thought there was an opportunity. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty bad. Because, yeah, I mean, we are just feeding to Sharp Sight. The play here was, I was thinking, and I must be misremembering, but I was thinking that he didn't have he had a Sharp Sight to use earlier this game. And yeah, that's going to cost us. I tried to go in for a sort of cheeky play there. It's important to not let the River Shaper draw the card, but it looks like we might get blown up by that because we have a pretty scarce win condition at this point. Okay, goes in for the attack, and he's got a wide fearsome attack. Unless, I think it's kind of like too late to draw an out here, so I can go ahead and concede this game. Yeah, I actually was misremembering it. Let's go ahead and, you know, go back a couple of turns here. This is really important. I thought, and of course I was just mistaken, I thought when I dragged the Shen here, in my mind, I was like, if he had Sharp Sight, he had to play it here. But if you look closer, of course, this isn't a Sharp Sight for him, right? Because the Shen doesn't have the ability to threaten Fiora with Sharp Sight, which is really important. You'd take that if you had it, just because it would force something more powerful than Sharp Sight. But in this case, I was just mistaken. So he did have the Sharp Sight in his range, and misidentifying that actually just ended up losing us the game. So that's you know, a great game. It's a good example of how this deck works. You do need to be able to predict what your opponent has, and you can play a very tight game if your opponent is a good player and you make one, you know, big misplay that can always cost you the game with this deck. All right, let's go ahead and play game 3. So, you know, I want to make sure that we don't end on a loss. But, you know, I'm not gonna be keeping in only games of me winning. As long as you guys are able to learn from it, as long as they're like good games where I can showcase how the deck functions, it's okay if I make like a little misplay. Teemo Twisted Fate. Okay, so Teemo TF is a little weird. You know, when you see me looking at these decks, I'm pulling them up. Teemo TF is not really something that I expect to see. It's like a really low sample size if I were to look that up on Mobalytics. So it's pretty tricky. Let's think about this hand and this sequence, right? So Teemo TF is likely to be a sort of semi-aggressive combo deck. Probably like, you know, Rummage and Hexcore, that kind of thing. Here, I do want the ability to actually play aggressively. I think Pursuit is going to come in pretty hot. And we're attacking on turn 3, which makes Mentor and Standalone both a little bit awkward and redundant with each other. I'm actually going to kick Standalone out of this opening hand, and here's why. I'm obviously keeping Fiora, and I'm obviously keeping one of my buffs. Don't really need 2 permanent buffs here, and neither of them is great because of these cards and because of the fact that we're attacking on 3. Neither of them is playable on curve, right? Because, you know, I can play Fiora on 3, can't play Mentor or Standalone, and I can play Mentor or Standalone on 4, but that doesn't really curve with, you know, keeping multi-trick up. So, we are keeping Relentless Pursuit because it's really good against decks that don't have the ability to stop it early on. It just accelerates your Fiora win, and a deck like Team OTF shouldn't really be able to threaten us, right? So the Pursuit is kind of free. The reason I want to kick the second buff is because I'm keeping so many cards. It is important to keep a couple of cards that we can buff. This is an extremely telling pass. Wow, he just passed without even playing Ignition. What could he have, guys? You know, he's keeping his mana up for something. And again, I don't know the list off the top of my head. PNC and Bilgewater doesn't tend to run combat tricks, right? So it's probably not going to be like a buff or something. I am going to pass here. What is that? Maybe like a 2-card combo. Like he's got double Mystic Shot or something, and he wanted to be able to... If I attacked with Sharp Sight, he could kill my Fiora with double Mystic Shot. But if he spent that 1 mana, he wouldn't be able to with Ignition. Something stopped him from playing that Ignition. He needed that 4 mana for something. Maybe it's obvious. Maybe I'm about to have like a duh moment. Either way, I'm happy to play Mentor out here. The magic amount of mana for this deck is like 4 mana. All your cheap tricks are 2 mana, and your expensive tricks like Repost, Bastion, and even Standalone are 4 mana. So if you have 4 mana, that means you have 1 medium trick or 2 cheap tricks. And if you have like 6 mana, that means you have 3 cheap tricks or a cheap and a medium. And if you have 8 mana, that's a good break point as well. So 4 mana is like sweet. We really value these kind of like minor breakpoints of mana. So for example, if I were to single combat here, I could try to punish off of that. There's not really a big play. We can go ahead and Relentless Pursuit. This Pursuit actually feels pretty unpunishable in this position because in this turn we actually don't need to keep our mana open. He's not going to be threatening our Fiora in any major way, I think, unless he augments while damaging my Fiora. Because he's at 2 mana, he can't kill our Fiora from 3. And when I attack into him, my Mentor will buff it back up. And if he plays a spell to kill my Mentor, well, then my Mentor died, but then he doesn't have the mana to kill my Fiora after I kill the bot anyway, right? So we kind of have him on all angles if we just take the Pursuit now. So he's at 2 mana. He can't deal the 3 damage. He needs to threaten the Fiora. And now we've got the kill. We can start putting on real pressure. And with this like Mentor condition, there's a good chance that the way we win this game is face damage at this point, because our Fiora is a little bit slow and we've got a lot of damage going face. There's a lot of positions where, you know, we might actually be inclined to take a pass just because we don't want to let him play anything. You know what? Looking at this hand, Fiora's already got 1 charge. Face damage is actually fairly unlikely in my win condition. Let's pass here. He's got a bit more mana than me, and that locks him out of the turn because my Fiora is threatening the challenger, so he can't play anything. He has to pass back, and we go to next turn. I sacrifice the attack token, but I lock him out of an action, and we both go back to full mana. It's a bit safer, and all we lose for that is face damage. Dealing face damage there is kind of tempting, but we give him the ability to play the entire unit, which is just like really dangerous, right? Giving up the Fiora threat, you know, it just means it unlocks his entire turn, basically. So what we can do here is potentially try to take a Relentless Pursuit and, you know, use that to lean a bit of pressure on. I'll pass in this point. Okay, takes another pass. And in this case, I can take a very non-committal second Mentor. Again, this keeps our options as open as possible. Because of the way this game is going, we aren't going to need that much mana up for combat tricks. There's a lot of other games where like he could threaten a lot that I would need a lot of mana. But in this case, we're actually just going to take an attack. And check out what we're doing here. We skipped the attack before because it wasn't a relevant amount of damage. This attack is different. This attack is actually putting him on a straight up 2-turn clock, right? And that's really, really important. We've even got Pursuit and the combat trick with Pale here. Now, he is showing that he's a burn deck. I'm going to go in pretty aggressively. I'm actually going to Pale my other Mentor here. That is a very aggressive play, But what that means is A, we still have enough mana for one spell here. B, we are pretty much going to Relentless Pursuit this turn, so the pale value is getting doubled. And he's kind of shown his hand. When he played that Get Excited, he showed us that he was kind of like an aggressive combo deck that wasn't going to be able to run a lot of defensive tools. And what that means is we should actually just be able to auto-win a lot of situations with this Relentless Pursuit, right? So that's pretty beautiful. We have a couple of options here. What I'd really love to do first is to start with a single combat, and then depending on what he does, I can choose to Pursuit or Sharp Sight or Hush. His unit has low attack if we don't let him augment more units, so this is fine. Twisted Fate could come down here. He's got 4 mana, so there's a lot of hands that might just try to Twisted Fate here, and he'd take like a blue card or something if he did. Second, the Android. Now check this out. Check out what we've done. We forced his mana down low. He's at 4 mana. What is he going to do with 4 mana when we now Relentless Pursuit? And we're tapping to 0. Keep in mind, tapping to 0 is really dangerous with this deck, but we know how his deck works. We know our Fiora's at 5. We know our mentors are attacking again with this buff. And we know that because we committed the first Pale, the Relentless Pursuit represents straight up lethal. So a very clean game, a very easy win. It's important to note that sequencing there. So I know it looked kind of weird that we didn't take the first attack. You know, we skipped an attack on that one turn. I think it was turn 5. And then in turn 7, it looked like a very similar position, and we took the attack in that case. It was a very different position. Because with the second case that we took the attack, that attack represented a 2-turn clock. The first attack that we declined on turn 5 would have been a 3-turn clock. So we would have attacked, he would have developed units freely, and we would have only been able to threaten to kill him on a 3-turn clock with face damage, which doesn't help because Fiora being at 1 charge is the same 3-turn clock off the Fiora win condition. By taking the attack on, I think it was turn 7, I believe, that final turn with the open Pale, because we knew what deck type he was, we were able to put him on a 2-turn clock, which, because of Pursuit gives you an extra turn, became a 1-turn clock, and just blow him out that turn entirely. All right. So, I mean, yeah, guys, that's basically the deck. That's how it works. It is a blast. It's a ton of fun. And as you can see from these games, playing it will make you a better... Like, I mean, honestly, playing any deck will make you a better player, but this is a deck that forces you to think about hand reading, think about the things they could have and what they're likely to have. And that's such an essential skill of being a Legends of Runeterra player. So I'd recommend this. It's a great deck. I personally find this very fun. I love this all-in combo style of deck. And that's it for me. I'm really happy to kind of be, you know, back making proper content again. I'm going to be completely honest with you. The last like 4 months for me has been very half-assed. I stopped doing the Meta Mondays. I stopped doing deck guides basically entirely. I skipped like most of my stream. Like on Twitch, I was streaming like half days. I would skip like a week here and there. And yeah, I was kind of, sort of it was burnout, but honestly, a lot of it was like the first Targon patch, the first Targon expansion and the second Targon expansion were both, I think pretty, personally, I think they missed in a lot of areas. This one feels a lot better. Not perfect, but I really, really like the game right now. There's a lot of cool things you can do. And so yeah, I'm just super excited to be back actually putting my all into making this content for you guys. And I hope you guys enjoy it. All right. I'll see you guys next time.